Today I'm doing something a little bit different. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I just signed up for my first Pokemon Draft League. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just talk about what my draft picks were, kind of what the rules are for a draft league overall, and just sort of my thought processes and my picks for what I did, and then just kind of talk about what I drafted overall. So this was the draft that I ended up pulling up. I'm going to go over to the team stats right here to make it a little bit cleaner. So part of how I picked all of my Pokemon is really reliant on where I was in the draft order. So there were 12 of us drafting, and I was pick 11 of 12. And the way the draft was, it goes 1 through 12 and then 12 through 1. So effectively what that meant was, being pick 11, I can't rely on having the number one best whatever Pokemon you would argue is. And I also know that I'm going to be able to pick 2 Pokemon effectively at the same time because of the way the snake order goes. So that's kind of what my thought process was going about when I was thinking about what Pokemon to pick for this draft. So let me just talk about the picks overall that I did. So to begin, the first pick that I went with were Gholdengo and Kingambit. My thought process for my first couple of picks were just, I want some generally powerful Pokemon that can just hit hard. And the other thing that I needed was, I needed to know kind of how the Pokemon work in general. I've only been playing like competitive Pokemon for just a few months at this point. So I really just want to make sure that I pick some strong Pokemon that I generally know how to use. And then because those were my first 2 picks and my next picks were going to be a while, I had some real time to like actually think about what real strategies I wanted to go with. So that leads to picks 3 and 4. So picks 3 and 4, I went with Weezing and Slacking. I think that duo overall is just a generically powerful thing to do. Slacking has a ton of type coverage in terms of physical moves that it can use. And, being able to just remove strong abilities from my opponents, forcing them to have to play around that, is also just going to be really big. Another thing I want to point out is, I'm not the only person to do this in this draft. One of the other people in the draft picked Galarian, Weezing, and Regigigas. So I'm not the only one who went with the idea of neutralizing gas in this draft. So those were picks 3 and 4. And then after this point, I was realizing that I had a bunch of kind of strong Pokemon that were good, that kind of did something, but I really wanted a good support Pokemon for this. And so I went with Screamtail for my pick 5. This was kind of the default base support Pokemon that I went with for the draft. Like, I drafted it with the intent of it being a support Pokemon. Obviously, it has other stuff that it can do, so I'm sure it'll come up as some form of attacker at some point, but this was the general idea for Screamtail. And then for Palafin, the Palafin pick was actually very interesting because I just think it looks cool. I just think Palafin looks cool. There wasn't really anything in particular I was trying to get at this time. I felt kind of confident in what I had so far, and I was just kind of looking for another sort of just thing that it allowed me to pivot, because Flip Turn, being able to get its ability online, being able to pivot into Slacking, or being able to pivot Slacking out, I'm sure that there's synergy that I could use right there. So then we get into the last couple of picks, and at this point I think it's 33, 34 points left in my draft. And I'm trying to figure out what I want. At this point, I have the Gholdengo through Palafin, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do for my last 30 some odd points? And at this point, I'm looking at the draft board. Let me see if I can pull it up right here. So I'm pulling up the draft board, right here. And at this point, I happen to notice that Tyranitar is available. I happen to notice that Tyranitar is available, and I happen to notice that Excadrill is also available. So I'm coming up with a plan of trying to figure out how I can use Tyranitar and Excadrill at this point. However, it comes to my attention that I could use Tyranitar and Excadrill, or since I have a fair bit of points, and at this point there was quite a few of these high point Pokemon still available. So I'm actually looking at these high point Pokemon. Hello? My cat is here. Hello. Anyways, so I'm looking at these, higher point Pokemon right here. And one of the ones that sticks out is this Iron Bundle. I have no idea what this Pokemon is. So I look it up, and it says it's a water ice type. And so I think, this thing's pretty interesting. What if I took a Alolan Ninetales? I can take a Alolan Ninetales, and then I can take the Iron Bundle, because I'll be able to take the two Pokemon effectively right at the same time. And I have no idea what Iron Bundle is, but I do know what Alolan Ninetales is. So that's how I ended up with the picks for the Alolan Ninetales and Iron Bundle. And at that point, I have 4 points left. And at this point, for my last two picks, I'm actually contemplating Chansey and Haunter. I'm contemplating Haunter as a ghost poison type with Levitate that I could possibly have that I can have with an Earthquake Spammer. I can have, being able to have that poison type with Levitate, usually pretty good. That's why Gengar was usually good. Plus it's able to hold the Eviolite, which is a boost to its defenses, so I get that. And I'm also thinking of Chansey at the same time. Again, it's an Eviolite user, it has some pretty good bulk, like as is, and I kind of know what Chansey is supposed to do as a whole. So that's where my mind is going. However, one of the other drafters is reaching out to me, and we're talking, and like offhandedly says Graffifi is a good Pokemon for my draft. And since I was already contemplating picking a poison type anyways, I'm like, let me just go for it. Why not? So I grabbed Graffifi as my 9th pick, which leaves me 1 point left. And I'm looking. What could I use for a 1 point? And I'm sure that anyone who looks at this could probably find a significantly better 1 point Pokemon that I could have picked instead of what I did. However, I picked Plusle because I thought Plusle would just be a fun Pokemon to use. It has some pretty decent support moves. It has, Helping Hand. It has Switcheroo. It has Skill Swap. It has Nuzzle. It has Electric Terrain. So there's like the Electric Terrain with Iron Bundle synergies as well. So that's kind of what my draft plan was for this whole thing. And this was kind of my thought process for how to draft. My week 1 match is like this. I already have my team built already. And when I have the matches, I will be posting those matches to YouTube as well. So that is kind of what I have for today. Thank you so much for watching.